Well, hello and a very warm welcome to the 2014 Behavioural Finance Forum from the Gherkin. Our first debate today is about pensions, really because the Chancellor and the Pensions Minister has been talking to us about not taking out annuities anymore, but going off, running off and buying a Lamborghini. Professor Duxbury from Newcastle Business School, Newcastle University, from your research, is this a sensible idea?
Of course, as individuals, we all find it very difficult to resist temptation. If we're looking at the dessert trolley, for example, we find it difficult to know that in the long term we should be choosing the healthy option, but we're always attracted to the less healthy option. And in some senses, the annuity decision is very similar to that. Now, evidence from my own research then suggests that individuals, when they come to evaluate an annuity, they will look at them from various perspectives, both from an aggregate evaluation and a disaggregate evaluation. And when they do this, they don't see the value in annuity products. And so therefore, they may well be tempted to take that initial pension pot and spend it in unwise ways from the long-term perspective, rather than make that decision to annuitize and look to the long-term and consider the longevity risk associated.
Well, Emily Hazley from Barclays, you've done some fascinating research in this area. Just tell me what your report comprises of.
So in this report, we did look at this annuity question, and we asked people, do you agree with the new reforms around annuities? And upwards of 70% agreed that it was a good reform. And also in line with the research, we found that only 30% of people said that they would annuitize, given this new freedom of choice. So yeah, this really agrees with the research showing that people do not favor annuities when they have the choice.
One of the big problems about rushing off and taking the pot of gold instead of the annuity, I think Mark Rowlands from Mercer's, would you say is about advice and the kind of quality of advice people can access over this?
The questions that an employee has to consider are really quite complex. So advice is going to be really important, but there's a structural problem, is who's going to deliver that and who's going to pay for it to actually give the employee the benefit of that advice. So there's a real problem here.
Neil Collins from the Financial Times. It is very complicated. There's lots of information out there. How do you feel the press has managed this whole pensions announcement and debate? Has it made it clearer? Have we hindered people?
I think that the constant changes of rules do make it extremely difficult. And I think that the basic problem is that people don't really want to confront these decisions in good time, because pensions are associated with old age and death, and they'd rather not think about them. And I think this has been a very important constraint. The other thing I think that's been a problem is that they are very complicated, and they have been made even more complicated by the pension providers, who don't really have a great interest in shedding daylight on this. They'd rather keep it obscure, because then you can't see the true costs of what you're getting.
With Mercer's, you might have some idea about engaging employees. I mean, pensions can be boring, you know, they can be unsexy. How do we get that interaction, people interested?
Mercer have been sponsoring, through Stanford University in America, some research in this. And one of the things that does actually work is you can't expect people in their younger and middle ages to engage with the future, which is actually quite close to death. It doesn't happen. They've got far too many other things going on, and they have all their life around them. So the intention is you should get people to try and think about engaging with their future self and getting an emotional connection. Now, if you can get an emotional connection, that can actually change behaviour. So one of the ways we've done that is used aging software, which is available on the web. You can just put a picture of a 25-year-old or a 35-year-old and then project it forward to 65. And then you ask them to think about what their life will be like at 65 and what their needs are, and all of a sudden they start making an emotional connection. And if you make that visual, you can actually get a reaction, whereas the traditional way of doing it, of putting a pensions brochure in front of someone with a table of facts and figures, it's incredibly dull and boring.
A final word from you, Professor Duxbury. What area do you think this research should go in? What's the most valued area for you to move your research on in pensions?
I think it's a way in which we perhaps engage individuals with the decisions that they're faced with, and present information to them in such a way that they can make more informed choices. Perhaps ways in which they can reduce the psychological distance between receiving of the pension pot at the point of retirement and how they then would look to spend that throughout their retired phase. Ways in which then we maybe draw on insights from construal level theory to make that longer term horizon more concrete to them today rather than to be abstract in the future, something they're not really engaging with. So looking at ways in which they can bring forward that perspective.